Are you ready to learn the chilling truth about the most terrifying and coldest night in the history of an entire nation? Official history often erases the names of ordinary people, but their incredible, almost superhuman resilience is forever etched in the memory of their descendants. January 23, 1839, the banks of the Cumberland River. The temperature drops to a critical -18 degrees, a figure that, for people in rags, deprived of proper food and shelter, meant a certain death sentence. This was not just winter, it was a veritable death march under the barrel of a gun. The guards, devoid of compassion, dictated their cruel terms. The exhausted, freezing travelers were allowed to stop and rest for no more than 15 minutes. Sitting on the icy ground meant falling asleep forever. How, under such conditions, was it possible not just to survive, but to keep the spark of life alive in others? Be sure to watch this video all the way to the end. You'll learn an incredible true story about how a young woman and an elderly man, defying all laws of biology, managed to overcome this endless icy fog to save the future of their kind. We'll reveal the secret of their unique method of mutual warmth and the spiritual shield that helped them endure when thousands of others collapsed from exhaustion. In the finale, we'll show you the object they carried through this hell, an artifact that became a symbol of the indomitable spirit. This is a story you can't listen to without shuddering. What if I told you that everything you believed about the limits of human endurance is a lie? The young woman pulled the thin woolen blanket tighter around herself, trying to shield herself from the biting wind on the bank of the frozen river. Standing silently beside her was a 61-year-old man, leaning on a staff made from a dry walnut branch. The frosty air burned their lungs with every breath, turning their exhaled breath into tiny ice crystals. The ground beneath their feet was hard as stone, covered with a thin layer of frost. They had been walking for many hours without proper rest or a hot meal. The wind from the Cumberland River grew stronger by the minute, seeping through their tattered clothes. The old man looked up at the darkening sky, unerringly sensing the approach of a heavy snowstorm. He remembered very different winters in his native lands, where the forests sheltered them from the elements. Now, however, only an open plain stretched out before them, swept by the merciless north wind. The woman tried to walk right behind her grandfather to conserve her dwindling strength. Every step was a struggle because of the snow caked onto her moccasins. Guards on horseback closely watched the long line of people walking. They strictly forbade stopping longer than the allotted time, constantly urging on those who fell behind. 15 minutes of rest seemed like a tiny moment in this endless icy desert. During that time, they could barely warm their frozen fingers with their own breath. They weren't allowed to build fires, as the column had to move forward without delay. Only their inner stubbornness compelled the travelers to get back up and continue this arduous journey. A sudden gust of wind nearly knocked them off their feet, forcing them to huddle closer together. They stopped for a moment to catch their breath behind the trunk of a lone, withered oak tree. The tree offered no real warmth, but at least it shielded them from the direct icy blast. The woman took a small piece of dried meat out of her travel bag and split it in half. It was their only food for the entire long and exhausting day. They chewed the tough fibers slowly, trying to extract as much energy from them as possible. The guard rode right past them, and his horse snorted discontentedly in the cold. The rider gestured that their brief stop was over and it was time to move on. The old man sighed heavily, leaned on his staff, and took his first step into the wind. The woman followed, feeling the frost begin to stiffen her muscles again. No stars were visible in the sky because of the thick, low clouds that covered the entire horizon. Only the white, snowy field faintly reflected the dim light of the moon, hidden behind the clouds. To keep his spirits up, the old man began to quietly hum an old marching song. His voice sounded faint but steady, setting the rhythm for their heavy steps. The woman picked up the tune, and this quiet sound became their only link to the past. The song told of the long winters their ancestors had weathered by warm hearths. Memories of home gave them new strength and compelled them to move forward. They understood that they must survive at any cost to preserve their heritage. The night was just beginning, but the people's strength was already running out due to the extreme cold. Now, they still had many miles to go before the next permitted major rest stop. Survival in such conditions depended entirely on willpower and mutual support. I'd be very interested to hear your thoughts on where people found the strength in such a situation. Please share your thoughts in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready for the shocking truth about how cold changes our perception of reality? 2 hours after dark, the frost intensified so much that the trees began to crack loudly. The air became thick and dry, burning the throat with every attempt to take a deep breath. The old man walked with a steady, measured stride, conserving every movement of his weary body. He knew that sudden bursts of speed would lead to rapid energy loss and hypothermia. The woman tried not to fall behind, fully immersed in the rhythm of their walk. A white expanse stretched out around them, devoid of any noticeable cover or undulations in the terrain. The wind constantly changed direction, flinging handfuls of prickly snow dust into the travelers' faces. This dust clogged the folds of their clothing, melted from the warmth of their bodies, and froze again into an icy crust. The woman's woolen blanket had become stiff as a sheet of iron, no longer retaining the necessary warmth. She had to constantly knead the frozen fabric with her fingers so it wouldn't restrict her movements. Every such gesture required enormous willpower and caused severe discomfort. During another brief 15-minute rest stop, they found a small depression in the ground. This spot did not fully protect them from the cold, but it shielded them from the strongest gusts of wind. The woman dropped to her knees and began to quickly rub her frozen feet right through her shoes. The old man stood so as to shield her with his body from the drafts coming off the river. He understood that a loss of blood circulation in her legs would lead to catastrophic consequences. These few precious minutes of rest had to be used as effectively as possible. The ice on the Cumberland River continued to make frightening sounds like distant thunder. During the winter of 1839, the cold in this region broke every possible record. The rivers froze to an immense depth, depriving travelers of the ability to obtain fresh water. The snow they melted in their mouths did not quench their thirst, but only further chilled their bodies. The woman broke off a tiny icicle from a shrub branch and began to slowly let it melt in her mouth. It was the only available way to get even a little moisture in this desert. The escorts changed direction, leading the column slightly away from the steep riverbank. The wind wasn't as strong there, but the snow cover turned out to be much deeper. They had to lift their legs high, blazing a trail through the untouched drifts. The old man took on the role of guide, breaking through the hard crust with his heavy wooden staff. The woman followed exactly in his footsteps, conserving her strength to overcome the snowy barrier. This small act of teamwork allowed them to move forward at their previous steady pace. There was still about an hour of continuous, exhausting walking left before the next short rest. The forces of nature seemed limitless, while human resources were rapidly dwindling. The people continued to move forward against all laws of logic and physics. What skills do you think were most important for survival in such extreme conditions? In the next chapter, you'll learn how ancient knowledge helped them outwit this merciless frost. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of survival, passed down by word of mouth for centuries. When the temperature drops to -18 degrees, simply walking no longer helps to keep warm. The old man knew a special breathing technique that had been taught to him in his early youth. The essence of it was to take short breaths through the nose and long exhalations through tightly pursed lips. This created slight pressure in the lungs and helped retain the body's internal heat. He signaled to the woman how to properly change her breathing rhythm on the go. The woman felt the difference immediately as soon as she began using this ancient method. The cold air no longer stung her chest, but slowly spread inside as a pleasant warmth. This allowed her to relax her shoulders a little and stop hunching over against the gusts of wind. A straight back promoted better blood circulation, which was critically important in such bitter cold. They seemed to have turned into two quietly working stoves, preserving precious energy within themselves. The surrounding white mist no longer seemed so deadly and frightening to them. Another important secret was the correct distribution of weight with every step on the ice. The old man did not step on his heel, but smoothly rolled his foot from the outside to the inside. This gait resembled gliding and significantly reduced the risk of falling on slippery sections. The woman watched his feet closely and tried to replicate these smooth movements exactly. Soon she noticed that the fatigue in her leg muscles began to gradually subside. They were conserving energy where others were wasting it in a constant struggle to maintain balance. The column's march continued without pause, turning into an endless test of endurance. The wind howled through the tree branches, creating the illusion of invisible winter spirits. The woman used these sounds as a metronome, matching her gliding steps to them. She mentally counted each step she took, breaking the long journey down into small segments. When she reached 100, she would start counting again, focusing solely on the simple task. This mental trick allowed her to distract herself from the biting cold and mounting fatigue. The guards increasingly wrapped themselves in their heavy army overcoats, shielding their faces from the wind. They looked on in surprise at the Indians walking ahead, who continued on their way in light clothing. The soldiers did not know the ancient secrets of retaining heat and suffered from the cold no less than the prisoners. Their horses moved slowly, heads bowed low, dragging their frozen hooves with difficulty. The old man understood that the guards, too, longed for this night march to end as soon as possible. For a brief moment, their shared plight had leveled the armed horsemen and the people trudging on foot. Snow began to fall in large flakes, quickly covering the tracks of the passing column. The white veil reduced visibility to a few dozen meters, turning the world into a closed-off space. The old man navigated by the train, intuitively finding the safest path. He skirted deep ravines and rocks hidden beneath the snow, reading the landscape like an open book. His staff functioned as a sort of radar, warning him in advance of any invisible obstacles. The woman placed her complete trust in his experience, following him as if he were her only guiding light. The hours merged into a single, continuous flow of time, having neither beginning nor end. The cold penetrated all protective barriers, testing the human spirit to its limits. The old man periodically checked on his companion with brief, barely noticeable glances. He saw her lips turn white and her tense cheekbones, but he did not notice despair in her eyes. She pressed forward with incredible tenacity, drawing strength from the ancient wisdom of her people. Their survival depended on how closely they followed these unwritten rules. This night became a true test of ancient knowledge under the harshest conditions. They proved that the human body is capable of great things if properly managed. Nature threw down a challenge, and they met it with calm and calculated resilience. The wisdom of their ancestors became a reliable shield against the icy wind. If you were impressed by this story of incredible endurance, please like this video. Something you've never seen before was happening right there, in the very heart of the snowstorm. Around 3 in the morning, the moment arrived when physical strength was completely exhausted. The woman began to stumble on level ground. Her steps became uncertain and halting. Her leg muscles refused to obey, turning into heavy, sluggish lumps of lead. Her brain sent signals to rest, urging her to lie down right in the snow and just close her eyes. The old man noticed this change in time and firmly grabbed the edge of her frozen blanket. He didn't let her stop for a second, realizing that a rest would be the end. The old man yanked her forward sharply, forcing her to take the next step against her desire to fall. His grip was surprisingly strong for a man of such advanced age. The woman instinctively leaned forward, and this impulse helped her overcome her numbness. They walked several meters in this tight grip until she regained her rhythm. It was a harsh but necessary method of salvation from overwhelming drowsiness. At such moments, the body switches to a mode of extreme energy conservation. Peripheral blood circulation slows down, conserving heat only for vital organs. Hands and feet lose sensation, turning into numb mechanisms for movement. The woman could not feel her fingers. They seemed foreign and completely wooden. She continued walking solely on sheer willpower, locking her consciousness deep inside. Her entire world had narrowed to the back of the old man walking ahead and the crunch of snow beneath her moccasins. The constant, monotonous walking lulled her mind into a light trance. In this state, the pain from frostbite dulled, giving way to a strange indifference. The surrounding trees seemed like unreal scenery arranged on a white canvas. The woman caught herself thinking that she was simply observing herself from the outside. This protective mechanism of the psyche helped her endure the extreme physical strain. The old man periodically called out to her in a quiet whisper so that she wouldn't sink too deeply into this trance. The makeshift protection of pine dust on their faces had long since lost its effectiveness. The skin on their cheeks had become chapped and covered with microscopic cracks from the dry, frosty air. However, no one complained, as words had no practical meaning in this situation. Their task was simply to keep moving their feet, advancing westward step by step. Guards with lanterns rode past, plucking the weary faces of the people from the darkness. The light of the lanterns seemed unnaturally bright and cut painfully into eyes unaccustomed to light. Deep snow in some sections of the path forced the column to slow to a crawl. Those walking in front trampled a narrow path for the rest to follow. This saved energy for those at the rear, but stretched the line out over many hundreds of meters. The old man always tried to stay closer to the center, where the trail was already firmly packed down. He knew that leading the way in such conditions meant quickly exhausting all his energy reserves. A rational approach to conserving strength was the key to their survival on that dreadful night. Overcoming their own physical limits became their only way to survive. They stepped beyond the limits of what was possible, becoming true symbols of human resilience. Do you think modern people could withstand such a test of the cold? In the next chapter, you'll learn how they coped with this terrible weather as the wind picked up. As morning approached, the wind from the Cumberland River suddenly died down, and a terrifying white silence descended. This absolute silence weighed on their ears more heavily than the recent deafening howl of the blizzard. A thick, icy mist hung in the air, consisting of microscopic crystals of frozen moisture. Visibility dropped to a minimum, obscuring even the figures of people walking a few steps ahead. The old man slowed his pace so as not to collide with the travelers ahead in this thick fog. The woman followed him, guided solely by the dull thud of his wooden staff. In such silence, every sound seemed unnaturally loud and distinct. The crunch of snow beneath their moccasins carried far across the plain, echoing off invisible obstacles. The heavy breathing of hundreds of weary people merged into a single rhythmic hum. The guards had stopped urging the column on with shouts, as the sound of their voices was drowned out by this thick veil. They rode in silence, wrapped in their overcoats and trusting the instincts of their weary horses. Nature seemed to have covered everyone with a huge soundproof dome, woven from frost and fog. Paradoxically, the absence of wind did not make the environment any warmer. On the contrary, the still cold air settled on their clothes like a heavy, icy shell. The frost seeped through the tiniest cracks in their cloaks, freezing the sweat on their weary bodies. The old man periodically rubbed his shoulders with rough mittens to get the stagnant blood flowing. He made the woman do the same, not letting her fall into a dangerous stupor. Movement remained their only source of internal warmth in this lifeless space. The fog obscured all landmarks, depriving the people of the ability to gauge the distance they had covered. It seemed as though the column was walking on an endless white treadmill, remaining in one place. This lack of visual progress weighed heavily on the psyche, evoking a sense of utter hopelessness. The woman tried to look only at her feet so as not to succumb to these destructive thoughts. She concentrated on the texture of the snow and the tracks left by those walking ahead. This narrow focus helped her stay calm and not think about how far they still had to go. Suddenly, a dull crack was heard in the distance, like the sound of a giant tree snapping. It was the ice on the Cumberland River bursting, unable to withstand the strain of the extremely low temperatures. The sound rolled across the plain, causing many travelers to instinctively flinch and stop. The old man calmly continued on his way, knowing that this natural phenomenon posed no danger to them. With a brief gesture, he reassured the woman, indicating that they simply needed to keep moving. The old man's calmness spread to those around him, nipping any emerging flashes of panic in the bud. While stopping in the fog, they encountered a new, unexpected problem. Without landmarks, it was difficult to find a suitable spot sheltered from possible drafts. They had to stop right out in the open, huddling together in a tight little group. People huddled close together, trying to create a shared source of precious warmth. It was a silent brotherhood of people, united by a common grief, trying to survive at any cost. 15 minutes passed like a single brief moment, after which they had to walk into the unknown once more. The woman's hair and eyebrows were covered in thick white frost, turning her into an icy statue. She blinked frequently to keep her eyelashes from freezing together, which would have robbed her of the ability to see the road. The old man looked no better. His face had taken on a grayish hue due to severe circulatory problems. However, his eyes remained clear and focused on an invisible goal ahead. He was the embodiment of an ancient power capable of withstanding any natural cataclysm. This inner strength sustained not only him, but also his weary companion. Walking in thick fog demanded immense concentration from all the senses. They had to constantly listen for their companions' footsteps so as not to fall out of step. Uneven ground became unpleasant surprises, as it was impossible to spot them in advance. The old man stumbled a few times, but always managed to lean on his trusty wooden staff just in time. The woman had learned to read the slightest changes in his gait and prepare for obstacles in advance. Their silent communication had reached a level of absolute intuitive understanding. The white silence receded, but the frost still held the plain in its firm embrace. The hours before dawn always carry a special, piercing, cold freshness. The travelers continued their endless march, step by step drawing closer to the saving dawn. Their strength was running out, but no one gave up, driven by the instinct for self-preservation. Ahead of them lay a new trial of light in even lower morning temperatures. What would happen if no one knew the secret to morning survival? The most dangerous time of day comes an hour before the first rays of sunlight appear. The temperature reaches its absolute lowest point, freezing the last remnants of warmth out of the air. The sky in the east begins to lighten imperceptibly, tinged with cold, steely hues. At this moment, the human body experiences maximum stress due to the depletion of its internal reserves. The old man knew this quirk of nature and urged the woman to quicken her pace, despite her terrible fatigue. This slight increase in pace was necessary to get the blood, which had thickened in the cold, flowing again. Her muscles responded with a dull, aching heaviness, but soon began to generate a little extra heat. The woman breathed heavily and unevenly, steam escaping from her mouth in thick white clouds. She gazed at the horizon, awaiting the sun's appearance as if it were the greatest miracle in the world. Every new step came with such difficulty, as if heavy stones were tied to her feet. But they kept walking, knowing that stopping at that moment would mean certain death. The trees along the riverbank were covered in a thick layer of fluffy frost, glistening in the pre-dawn twilight. This fairy tale landscape looked incredibly beautiful, but it harbored a deadly danger. Any touch of the frozen branches caused icy dust to fall right down the collar of her clothes. The old man led his companions strictly down the center of the well-trodden path, avoiding contact with the vegetation. He used his staff not only for support, but also to brush the snow off the path. His movements had slowed, but they had not lost their original confidence and precision. The brightening sky gradually revealed the extent of the distance they had covered during the night. Behind them lay a long strip of trampled snow, fading into the misty, frosty haze. Ahead lay the same endless white plain, across which they would have to walk all day. The realization that the journey would not end at dawn took a heavy toll on their morale. The old man understood this, so he constantly reminded the woman of the need to live only in the present moment. There was no need to think about tomorrow. They had to focus only on the next step. The air had become so clear that it seemed made of the finest, most resonant crystal. Sounds carried for great distances, distorting and taking on an unnatural metallic echo. The crunch of snow beneath hundreds of moccasins turned into a continuous, piercing screech that cut through their ears. The woman pulled her hood tighter, trying to shield herself from this unpleasant, monotonous sound. She felt completely exhausted, but ancient breathing techniques kept a spark of life burning. The spark was faint, but it was enough to keep her body's mechanisms functioning. Finally, the edge of the sky turned a soft pink, heralding the imminent sunrise. This color reflected off the snow, giving the entire plain a slightly warmer visual hue. Psychologically, it felt a little easier, even though physically the temperature hadn't risen by a single degree. People instinctively turned their faces toward the east, awaiting the first life-giving rays. The old man allowed himself a slight, barely perceptible smile, realizing that they had survived this terrible night. They had managed to cheat death using only ancient knowledge and incredible willpower. The sun slowly rose above the horizon, glinting dazzlingly off the snow. Its rays were utterly cold, but they carried a light that dispelled the night's fears. The column continued on its way, but the people's steps had become a little more confident and rhythmic. The woman lowered her hood, exposing her exhausted face to the bright sunlight. She felt no warmth, but the very fact that morning had arrived gave her immense moral support. The most terrifying ordeal of darkness and extreme cold was now behind them. The morning brought new challenges, but their victory over the night's frost instilled confidence in them. They had proven their right to live in the most unbearable natural conditions. The freezing night had tempered their spirit, transforming fatigue into a quiet and unshakable resolve. What do you think was the hardest part of that long, pre-dawn wait? In the next chapter, you'll learn what daytime survival techniques these incredible people used along the way. As the sun rose, the nature of the trials changed, but they did not become any less severe. Daylight, reflecting off the endless snow cover, placed an unbearable strain on the eyes. Snow blindness was a real threat, capable of completely disorienting a person. The old man had prepared a simple but effective means of protecting their eyesight in advance. Using a piece of dark bark, he cut narrow slits in the bark and secured this contraption to the woman's face with a string. This primitive device blocked out excess light, protecting the retina from dangerous ultraviolet radiation. The air temperature rose by only a few degrees, yet remained deadly for an exhausted body. The wind picked up again, whipping up stinging snowdrifts that obscured the trail. Walking during the day was psychologically easier, but the physical exhaustion after a sleepless night was taking its toll. Every movement seemed slowed down, as if they were moving along the bottom of the deep ocean. The old man kept setting a steady pace, not letting the woman relax for a single moment. He knew that daytime drowsiness was treacherous and could lead to a sudden fainting spell while walking. Food remained extremely scarce, consisting only of small portions of dry rations. During the day, they managed to chew another small piece of tough dried meat, washing it down with snow. Her body demanded hot food to restore energy, but building fires was still forbidden. Digestion slowed in the extreme cold, so energy from food was absorbed very slowly. The old man taught the woman to hold food in her mouth for a long time so it could warm up before she swallowed it. This trick helped avoid excessive cooling of the stomach and preserved internal heat. The landscape gradually changed. The plain gave way to small hills and ravines. Climbing the hills was incredibly difficult. Her thigh muscles burned with strain. On the descents, however, she could catch her breath a little, letting gravity do some of the work. The old man chose the best routes, trying to avoid slopes that were too steep or slippery. His staff became an indispensable tool, helping him slow down on the descents and pull himself up on the ascents. The woman followed closely in his footsteps, using the steps he had carved into the snow. By midday, many of the travelers began showing signs of severe frostbite in their extremities. People limped, trying not to step on their numb heels or toes. The old man made the woman constantly wiggle her toes and her moccasins to maintain blood microcirculation. It was painful, but it prevented irreversible tissue necrosis in the bitter cold. They walked, gritting their teeth, enduring the pain for the sake of taking the next vital step. Ancient knowledge helped them balance on the fine line between life and severe disability. The shadows from the hills began to lengthen, heralding the imminent arrival of another twilight. The realization that another cold night lay ahead weighed heavily on their shoulders. However, there was no panic, as they had already proven to themselves that they were capable of surviving this hell. The old man walked steadily and rhythmically, his back remaining straight despite his immense fatigue. He was a model of unyielding will, which inspired the woman to keep fighting. They prepared for a new battle against the cold, gathering what remained of their mental and physical strength. The daytime march proved to be no less of a trial than the nighttime trek through the blizzard. The light brought no warmth, but only made the full scale of this tragic journey visible. The people continued to march westward, leaving traces of their incredible endurance on the white snow. Every meter they covered was a small victory of the human spirit over merciless nature. They proved that even in the most unbearable conditions, one can find the strength to keep going. Conserving energy became the main skill they had to master on the go. The old man showed the woman how to properly relax her facial muscles so as not to waste energy on facial expressions. In the bitter cold, clenched jaws and furrowed brows waste precious calories completely in vain. The woman's face became an impassive mask, expressing neither pain, nor fatigue, nor fear. This allowed her to save every ounce of energy, which was redirected to sustaining the work of her heart and lungs. Such conscious control over her own body was the key to long-term survival in the cold. Hand movements were also reduced to the bare minimum to avoid unnecessary heat loss. The woman tucked her hands deep into the folds of her woolen blanket, pressing them against her stomach. She did not swing her arms while walking, as people usually do in warm weather. Instead, she used slight twists of her torso to maintain balance on slippery sections. This walking technique required a certain amount of skill, but the old man closely monitored her form. Soon, these economical movements became completely natural to her and were performed on a reflexive level. An important aspect of conserving energy was maintaining a steady emotional state. The elder taught the woman to quell any flashes of irritation or despair at their very onset. Strong emotions trigger an adrenaline rush, which causes the heart to beat faster and expend energy. In their situation, such an overuse of resources could prove fatal within a matter of hours. They cultivated within themselves a state of complete inner peace and acceptance of the harsh reality around them. This philosophy helped them perceive the cold not as an enemy, but as a given to which they simply had to adapt. Proper breathing remained the primary tool for controlling internal heat. They continued to use the technique of short inhalations and prolonged exhalations through pursed lips. This method not only warmed the lungs, but also set a clear rhythm for the entire walking process. His breathing was synchronized with his steps. One breath for every 2 steps, one exhalation for the next 2. This strict system transformed the hard labor into an automated process requiring no conscious effort. His body functioned like a well-oiled machine, consuming the minimum amount of available fuel. The meager diet forced them to seek unconventional ways to obtain energy. The old man showed how to chew small pieces of pine resin collected from the trees during a rest stop. The resin provided no calories, but it stimulated saliva production and tricked the stomach, dulling the feeling of intense hunger. Moreover, chewing helped maintain concentration and distracted her from the monotony of the endless march. The woman felt a tart, piney taste in her mouth, which briefly brought her back to reality. It was a tiny trick, but in conditions of total exhaustion, every little thing helped. Toward evening, the accumulated fatigue began to manifest as mild auditory hallucinations. The whistling of the wind seemed like the whispering of voices, and the creaking of the snow resembled distant and strange music. The old man had warned her about this effect and taught her not to pay attention to the tricks of a weary mind. He advised focusing on physical sensations, the contact of the foot with the ground or the pressure of the staff. Shifting attention from external illusions to internal, real processes helped maintain clarity of mind. They walked through this gloom, clinging firmly to reality with every measured step. In conditions of extreme exhaustion, words lose their meaning, giving way to silent understanding. The old man and the woman exchanged almost no intelligible phrases all day. Conversation required energy that was vitally necessary to conserve in order to maintain their inner warmth. Instead of words, they used the language of gestures, glances, and barely perceptible touches on the shoulder. A light tap with the staff signaled the need to change pace or pay attention to an obstacle. It was perfect communication, born out of the harshest struggle for survival. Psychological support on such a journey was no less important than proper breathing or clothing. The presence of a strong and confident person by her side prevented her from giving up in the most difficult moments. The woman knew that the old man would not abandon her, and this knowledge gave her new strength. In turn, the old man felt responsible for his companion, which kept him on his toes. Their mutual dependence became a powerful driving force, propelling both of them forward across the snowy plain. They became a single entity where one's weakness was immediately offset by the other's willpower. During short breaks, they always positioned themselves to shield each other from the wind. This silent division of roles happened completely naturally, without any prior agreement. The old man shielded the woman with his back, taking the brunt of the strongest gusts of the icy wind. She felt this support and tried with all her might to keep up with the set pace. It was a silent battle against their own weaknesses, where the main prize was their very lives. In this battle, there were no losers, for they shared every victory equally. In moments when the pain in their frozen legs became unbearable, only the presence of a companion helped. The knowledge that a person experiencing the same suffering was walking beside them paradoxically eased the pain. Suffering shared between two people became half as devastating to the psyche. They could not take the pain away from one another, but they could help each other bear it with courage. This shared overcoming of hardships forged a steely character capable of withstanding any trials of fate. No frost could break the will of people united by such a strong inner bond. In the evening, when their strength was completely spent, the old man performed a heroic and unassuming act. He quietly handed the woman his last piece of dried meat during a 15-minute rest stop. She tried to refuse, but he looked at her sternly and shook his head. That gesture embodied the very essence of his concern for the continuation of the human race and the preservation of future generations. The woman accepted this gift with immense gratitude and tears on her frozen eyelashes. This tiny morsel of food became a symbol of the greatest self-sacrifice under inhuman conditions. Darkness began to descend once more upon the snow-covered plain, blurring the boundaries between sky and earth. The second night of their endless march was approaching, promising to be no less harsh than the previous one. But now they were much better prepared for it, armed with the experience of the long days that had passed. Their movements had become more calculated, and their coordination had reached a level of perfect natural harmony. They knew each other's weaknesses and knew how to lend a shoulder or a hand at just the right moment. Silent support had become their main weapon against the approaching icy fog. The power of silent support proved its incredible effectiveness in the most hopeless and terrifying situations. Words were unnecessary where pure instincts and deep human affection prevailed. They survived because they knew how to give their all to save the person walking beside them. That night was not the end of their journey, but the beginning of a new story of great triumph. They left their invisible mark on history, proving the invincibility of the human spirit. The story of that long night on the Trail of Tears became a symbol of the incredible endurance of an entire people. The nameless heroes, whose names have been erased from official records, left behind something greater. They left an example of how a person can stand up to the most ruthless and destructive forces of nature. Their survival was no accident or mere luck in the extreme winter conditions of 1839. It was the result of the skillful application of ancient knowledge, iron discipline, and incredible fortitude. These qualities helped them preserve their lives and pass on their legacy to future generations. The old man demonstrated that the wisdom of the ancestors is the most powerful tool in the struggle for survival. His knowledge of nature, his ability to read the landscape, and the proper allocation of strength saved his companion's life. He did not rely on brute physical strength, which quickly fades in the bitter cold. Instead, he used a subtle understanding of how the human body works and the laws of energy conservation. His staff became a symbol of guidance and support on this bleak journey through the white mist. The old man's experience proved more valuable than any modern gear or warm factory-made clothing. The young woman demonstrated remarkable adaptability and a willingness to learn in the most critical situations. She did not succumb to panic or despair, but clearly followed the instructions of her experienced and wise mentor. Her ability to endure extreme physical strain and pain commands deep respect from modern researchers. She pressed on to secure the future of her people, drawing strength from the awareness of her vital mission. This inner motivation proved stronger than frostbite, starvation, and the biting, icy north wind. She became the living embodiment of a mother's resilience, knowing no boundaries or obstacles in her path. The tactic of constant movement and strict control over the body's resources proved highly effective. The ban on prolonged stops, which seemed cruel, actually saved many people from freezing to death. 15-minute breaks prevented relaxation, forcing the body to constantly generate the necessary internal heat. This harsh survival strategy became a bitter but valuable lesson for all subsequent generations. Modern experts in extreme survival still study the experience of these night marches. Ancient methods of body management continue to inspire admiration among professionals worldwide. The silent interaction among travelers became the key to maintaining psychological well-being on the journey. The ability to understand one another without words conserved energy and created a sense of reliable support. In conditions of total isolation from the familiar world, this invisible social contact was vital. People survived not alone, but by uniting into small, tightly knit mutual aid groups. This sense of collective responsibility helped them overcome fear and move forward despite everything happening around them. Unity of spirit proved stronger than any frost or the harsh orders of an armed army convoy. The story of survival on the banks of the Cumberland River forces us to rethink the limits of human capabilities. We often complain about minor everyday inconveniences, forgetting what our ancestors had to go through. Their experience teaches us to appreciate the warmth of home, the availability of food, and the safety of modern life. At the same time, It reminds us that within each of us lie vast reserves of vital energy. These reserves can be awakened at any moment if insurmountable and difficult circumstances demand it. Knowledge of history makes us stronger, allowing us to draw on the experience of past great victories. This night march will go down in history as an example of the triumph of will over a merciless force of nature. Nature challenged humanity, and they responded with dignity and incredible tenacity. They did not break under the weight of ice and snow, proving their right to continue existing. Their footprints in the snow have long since melted away, but the mark they left on human memory will remain forever. We remember these nameless heroes with deep reverence and respect for their great feat of life. Their path through the darkness has become a beacon for all who seek the strength to overcome their own difficulties. The legacy of an indomitable will lives on in stories, songs, and the silent respect of future generations. This story teaches us never to give up, even when circumstances seem utterly hopeless and terrifying. The human spirit is capable of melting the thickest ice and surviving the longest and coldest winter night. We bow our heads in admiration of the courage of those who walked this path and remained undefeated. Their story is an eternal reminder that true strength is always hidden within us. What other historical examples of survival do you think we should cover on our channel? Leave a comment with suggestions for future videos you'd like to see. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new, gripping stories about the power of the human spirit.